Today, I'm ranking every major Elden Ring boss based on difficulty. I'm including every required boss, as well as every boss that gives an achievement or trophy for defeating. This list is going to be partially based on how strong a boss is when you encounter it, but it's also taking into account how strong it is overall. But mostly, this is just my experience and which bosses I found the easiest and hardest. There are 34 bosses that I'm including, so we'll start backwards from the easiest, and we'll end with Melania. At number 34, I have the Mimic tier. It's just a one-on-one NPC fight, and you can cheese it incredibly easily just by unequipping your items. And it's still not even hard if you don't cheese it. That's why I have it as the weakest boss. At number 33, I have the Ancestor Spirit. I don't even really know why you get an achievement for beating this boss, because it's so easy. It's harder getting to it than actually beating it. It doesn't have an incredible amount of health, and it doesn't have any threatening attacks. It just runs away for half the fight. As long as you have more than 10 vigor, this is a free boss fight, which is why it's the second weakest at number 33. At number 32, I have the Leonine Misbegotten. You get a weapon that trivializes this fight right outside its arena, and this fight isn't even hard to begin with, so it really doesn't need it. Just overall an incredibly easy fight. At 31, I have Loretta. Just another early game boss. She can be a little difficult if you're underleveled, especially Vigor, because she'll just run away and spam high damaging spells. But overall, she's not hard. At number 30, I have the Red Wolf of Radagon. This is just a regular enemy that's standing in your way to fight Renala. This doesn't really need to be a boss, but it can still be a pain, especially because the run back is so bad. He's another boss that'll have low health, but will run away and do high damage spells. Overall, he's not hard, but he can be slightly annoying. After this, we get into the real bosses. At 29 is Margit the Fell. This boss can be a complete roadblock if you encounter him too early. That being said, Margit isn't too bad if you know what you're doing. It takes time to get used to his dodge timings because he has a lot of delayed attacks and really long combos. But once you figure those out, this fight won't be too bad. I've fought Margit countless times, so he's probably a lot easier for me than most people. Still, I tried not to place him too low, but I can understand if you think he's harder. At 28, I have Magma Worm Makar. This boss isn't hard, especially if you summon the Great Horned Targoth. It's a pushover. The reason it's so high is because his magma everywhere just makes this fight so annoying. It's basically just one big AoE attack. Magic would probably make this fight a lot easier, but normally I just go for the Grand Lift of Dectus when I'm going to Altus Plateau. At 27, I have Godric the Grafted. For some reason, I find Godric to be a lot more challenging than Margit, even though a lot of people seem to think Margit's the harder boss. He has a lot of high damaging AoEs and some long combos. His phase 2 can be pretty easy because you can just run up in front of his face when he does his dragon attack, and you can just wail on him for a little bit. Overall, it's still not a hard boss, but I struggle with it more than I'd like to admit. Number 26 is Renala. She's basically just a mix of the Deacons of the Deep and Crystal Sage from Dark Souls 3. Her first phase is incredibly easy, but her second phase can do a lot of damage if you're not prepared for it. This fight is basically just a vigor check. We're still in the easy bosses, but from here on out, these ones could kill you if you're just not careful enough. At 25 is the Regal Ancestor Spirit. This fight still isn't super hard, but I put it this high just because it can heal. So if you don't have your weapon upgraded sufficiently, you just can't kill it. This fight is made easier because you already know most of its moveset from the first time you fight it. So overall, it's still really easy. It's just this high because it can heal. Number 24 is the Dragonkin Soldier of Noxtella. This boss will be really easy if you're overleveled, or really hard if you're underleveled. Really though, in the area you find this boss, it's hard to be underleveled. So most of the time, he's really easy. At 23, I have Godfrey. This is one of my favorite bosses in the game. He's tough, but he can be really passive, so you can just run away and heal most of the time. All in all, he's a challenge, but a fair one, which is why he is just below the middle. Number 22 is the Godskin Noble. Since it's just one Godskin, it's not too bad. This is just an average mid-game fight. His phase 2 can be a little intimidating, but he's not that bad. Number 21 is Sir Gideon Ofnir the All-Knowing. This is one of the few bosses that you can wreck in like 3 seconds, even if you're underleveled. Despite that, if you don't do that, he can be really annoying. So he balances out to about the middle. Number 20 is Fia's Champions. This fight is more annoying than difficult, but it can be pretty hard if you don't use summons. Fia's summons is just a mid-boss. It's just a little annoying and a little difficult, but it's nothing special. At number 18, I have the Draconic Tree Sentinel. This is one of those few required bosses that doesn't give an achievement. At least I think Draconic Tree Sentinel's required. Actually, he's not technically, because you can go to see Fia and take that portal to Landell, but DTS is basically required, so I'm including him. Other than being able to be cheesed by poison mist, this boss doesn't have any real weakness. He's a real tough mid-game boss. Number 17 is Elmer of the Briar. He actually isn't even the strongest bell-bearing hunter, which is crazy. The one in Caelid's stronger. But this is just a really tough fight. Bell-bearing hunters have always been one of the hardest boss types to beat for me. And that's why he's so high. Number 16 is Estelle. Estelle has one of the most unique movesets of any boss on this list. That makes them really hard to dodge if you don't know them by heart, because they're unlike any other attacks. This fight is really unique, but it's not actually that hard if you know how to dodge the attacks. At number 15 is Loretta, Knight of the Haligtree. This is basically just the first Loretta fight, but scaled for endgame. She really doesn't have any new attacks, but you're supposed to be level like 140 when you fight her. Most of the time though, when you do fight her, you're not going to be that high a level, which is why she's this high. She herself, though, is really easy if you're a proper level when you fight her, though. Number 14 is Star Scourge Radahn. If you couldn't summon NPCs to help you in this fight, it'd probably be several spots higher. But that's how you're intended to fight him. You fight Radahn really early for how strong he is, which is why he's so high. He's still not that hard though, which is why he's only this high. Number 13 is Fire Giant. I hate this boss. He's just a DPS check before you go into Farah Missoula. Not only that, he spams a ton of random AoE fire attacks, which just isn't fun. This is another boss that is more annoying than hard, because dodging his actual attacks is pretty easy. It's just his AoEs that go random places that are really not consistent to dodge. Number 12 is Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy. This is probably the only really hard gimmick fight. Well, that's actually a lie, because Godskin Duo exists. But this is like if Yorm the Giant was a hard fight. It's still not that great of a fight, because most of the challenge comes from seemingly undodgeable AoEs that can happen randomly, like the lava beneath him and Bad Skull RNG that can make you take hits no matter what. I still wouldn't call this a bad boss, but it is leaning that way. Bringing back the gimmick of the Storm Ruler / Serpent Hunter was really cool though. Number 11's Horaloo. Having his first phase be Godfrey does make this fight easier, but his second phase can do so much damage, he's still one of the hardest fights in the game. If you don't have proper vigor, he can easily one-shot you with some of his grabs. Starting off the top 10, I have Moog. Moog has some really high damaging attacks and some decent AoEs that make him real tough to fight. If it wasn't for a specific tier for the physic, this fight would be several places higher. Because his phase transition can do so much damage if you don't use it. At number 9, I have Morgott. He's just so hard for a mid-game boss. His combos seem to go on forever, and plus this time he can do bleed build-up. You can summon Melina to help for this fight, but she doesn't do that much. Overall, this is one of the hardest, if not the hardest, fight before the end game. Number 8 is the Dragon Fortisax. This is one of the coolest cinematic fights in the entire game. The actual fight itself, though, kinda sucks. It's just AoE lightning and death blight over the entire arena, which is really not fun to deal with. This fight can be really hard because if you linger in the death blight for too long, you just die no matter what. And the AoE lightning can be really damaging. This is just a really tough fight. Number 7 is Commander Niall. Niall is just so annoying because he's the only boss in the game that uses summons. There are other bosses that have minions that fight him, but this guy actually uses the summoning bell. His 2 knights aren't the toughest on their own, but fighting them in addition to Niall himself is really tough, especially when Niall can use Frostbite. Once you fight the boss himself, he's still challenging, but it's nowhere near as difficult. It's just having a 3-on-1 fight can be really hard, which is why I always summon for this fight. Number 6 is the Godskin duo. These are the most annoying, worst guys to fight in the entire game. The Godskins were not made to be fighting together. The worst part about this fight is that it's required to beat the game. If it wasn't required, I really wouldn't care. But it's just a bad fight. Summoning Bernal can make this a lot easier, as well as can summoning. But still, it just feels really janky, especially since they don't just have their own separate health bars, but they share a health bar. So you have to defeat them both twice most of the time. At number 5 is Valiant Gargoyle. Despite the name not being plural, there are 2 of them. Fights with 2 enemies are a lot of the times harder than fights with 1, but that's kind of obvious. The problem with these fights, though, is they're not made to fight next to each other. They're made to be their own individual bosses. The BS that this creates just makes them a lot harder, which is why Valiant Gargoyle and Godskin Duo are so high. Valiant Gargoyles are just a little higher because they can't be bled. Number 4 is Malekith the Black Blade. Malekith in Phase 1 jumps around super erratically, which makes him really hard to track and deal damage to. In Phase 2, once Geraint gets destined death to use as his sword, he becomes a lot harder, which is why he's number 4. Number 3 is Radigan and Elden Beast. Of course, the final bosses have to be in the top 3. I debated a lot putting this at number 2, but I just had to put it at number 3 because the 2 bosses in front of it, I think, are just a little harder. Radigan is a mostly fair fight, but he does have really high damage. Elden Beast, though, is total BS. Spewing AoE attacks generally makes a boss harder, but a lot less fun. And that's basically all Elden Beast does. If this boss was just Radigan, it would be a lot easier, but I feel like I'd like it a lot better. Elden Beast just seems tacked on because Radigan wasn't hard enough. Number 2 is Dragon Lord Placidusax. For most of the fight, Placidusax just kind of sits there and spews lightning all over the place. But the lightning does do a lot of damage. And when Placidusax does start moving, you can't really hit him, and he can do insane damage to you. Plus, he has a really cool attack where he shoots a bunch of lasers all over the place. And if you don't have like 60 vigor, those lasers will just straight one-shot you. It's crazy. Overall, I think he's just a harder boss than Radigan and Elden Beast, but these two are really close bosses. I almost put him at number 3. Alright, number 1's Malenia. I said this at the beginning of the video because this is the most obvious pick. If you've ever even heard of Elden Ring, you knew Malenia was number 1. So, since that's the end of the list, thank you all for watching. Like and subscribe if you want to see more.